project that we conducted at Euroexam International, and which aimed to achieve a higher level of reliability and validity in assessing our writing test papers, our writing products. This research was actually led by Zoltán Lukács, who is our research lead at Euroexam International, and was also assisted by our International Advisory Board, members of our International Advisory Board, Norman Fairhouse from CEFRiTES, the Netherlands, and also Glyn Jones, formerly Pearson language tests. Right, so just to give you a little outline, I would like to start with the international context that we work in with these exams, Euroexams, and what actually motivated us to think more carefully and think again about the validity of the results that we provide. I will then look at the operational rating scales, the scales that we are currently using to assess writing and speaking products in the exams. Then I would like to introduce what I would like to call a viable alternative, the checklist approach, which will be a checklist of binary decisions that the rater is making. I would also like to give you a brief description of the research development project, how we arrived at the final checklist, and the significance of all this and the way forward, how this can be, what sort of significance this will have for the future. So, in our international context, I would first of all like to make a connection between what we do and the overall topic or theme of this conference, which is CFR in tertiary education system. And this will have great significance because the whole aim of the project is to ensure that high-stakes exams like the ones that we provide have a more valid result for people who would like to enter, especially people who would like to enter higher education. High-stakes exams are taken for a variety of purposes. Some people take it because they want to gain citizenship of a country. Other people take a high-stakes exam because they want get to work or get a certain position within a company, or they might take an exam for educational purposes. This is what we also see in our own practice. We primarily operate in countries in Central and Eastern Europe and also the Russian Federation. These are our major sort of markets where most of our test takers come from. And if we look at this population, we see that, for example, in Russia, a lot of people, also teachers and even teachers of English, are taking our Euroexams because the certificate can go into their professional portfolio and it will help them in their career advancement as well. So that's sort of work purposes. Also in Russia, younger learners and, for example, younger exam takers in Serbia, school kids basically, are just taking it for motivational purposes. They enjoy passing a test and it just helps them to move on to the next academic year. And perhaps most importantly, the largest group in our exam-taking population is actually the late teens, early 20s age group. So this age group sort of defines very much the way we need to think about our tests because of its role in higher education and social mobility. And if we just look at EU statistics and forecasts, they say that by the year 2020, in about 2 or 3 years' time, at least 1/3 of jobs will require people to have high qualification. In other words, having a college or university degree. Whereas at the moment, this is just over a quarter of the population. So there's a bit of a gap between what is expected in the next few years and what we have at the moment. Which means more people will possibly be going into higher education and are going into higher education. And also doing their degree in English and going for an EMI course where English is the medium of instruction. Then we also looked at numbers again more carefully, and we saw that people from Central Europe are going to universities in Western Europe in greater and greater numbers. We just picked Germany and the UK for the purpose of this little investigation. Our data is based on UCAS, UK, and also German available online available data. And from this we saw two things. One thing is that going from 2012 to 2016, we can see that first degree, undergraduate, postgraduate degrees, there are more people doing them. The other thing that we notice is that if we look at Germany-UK relationship, previously more people were going to Germany. But now, 2016, this order has been reversed, and now more people are going to study in the UK, just comparing these two countries. So that further defined our focus, and we wanted to look at UK universities in particular and their expectations. Of course, you might be familiar with the CELTS, the Secure English Language Tests, which is a very, very limited group of tests. It's basically two tests, it's IELTS and Trinity, which are accepted by UK universities and also by border agency UKVI, UK Visa and Immigration. But most importantly, those CELTS only need to be taken by candidates who would like to enter the UK from what they call a Tier 4 visa country, so from outside Europe. If you're inside Europe, if you're inside the EU, you don't necessarily have to take one of those two exams, where obviously security seems to be it's in the name, security seems to be the main issue. But apart from security, fair and ethically sound results that you can justify and rely on probably are very, very important, and certainly in the European context, that's what we wanted to look at. Okay. So just a bit of history. Rating on a scale. When we started Euroexam in 2001, it was in the year that the CEFR was published. That's when Euroexams were actually born in the same year. And it was, we would like to think, and we are pretty sure it's true, that this was the first set of tests that were directly based on and developed using the CFR and the CFR descriptors, the CFR scales. So those are the scales we used for, and we still use for speaking and writing. And those are the scales on the basis of which we make the decision whether a candidate taking Euroexam level A1 test or Euroexam level B2 test can pass or not when we're using those scales. But for a moment, and this is where we would go into the research, I would like to stop and quote something from the CFR itself about rating on a scale. It says, the CFR says in Chapter 9, judging that a person is at a particular level or band on a scale made up of a number of such levels and bands. This is rating on a scale. We found that that didn't quite work as well for us as it should have. This is what we used. This is a rating scale. This is one example, B2 writing. there are 6 different criteria when assessing a writing paper. I just picked 2 of them. One is called task achievement, the other is grammatical range and accuracy. Task achievement focusing on the communicative value of the piece, and well, the other one probably speaks for itself. And these are the descriptors that raters use when making a judgment about a paper. So you can see that it's a 0 to 5 scale, with 0 basically meaning that the task hasn't really even been attempted, and then from 1 going up, so basically a 0 means 0% achievement, a 1 equals to 20%, a 2 40%, 3 60, 4 80, and 5 100%. That's how the scales work. And in a number of our settings, what is the accreditation requirement is a 60% pass mark. So our pass mark is calibrated at 60%. If you get 3 points on average across the 6 criteria, you will pass the exam. If you don't, you cannot pass. You might notice that 2 ranges, the 2-point range and the 4-point range, have no descriptors. So the idea with this scale was that you will get 4 points if you have fulfilled all the requirements for the 3-point range, but not quite everything for the 5-point range. So that's how the raters worked and awarded 4 points in those cases. Of course, we actually found that this is especially a problem here. Okay, fine, you might be able to make a good enough judgment, but this is where you decide, is the paper a pass or a fail? And this 2-point level is actually not quite described in as much detail as it could be. So we moved on. And we looked at the statistics of the results that we are getting on our papers. This is based on 2,624 papers altogether, and you can see how all the papers are pushed to the middle. The results are pushed to the middle, and they're very, very little at the high end or the low end. And we felt that this is possibly not quite representative as it should be of the population's real proficiency in the language and in writing specifically. So again, we thought that how can we improve this? So why is this happening? Why did we get this statistic? We felt that it's possibly because of the way how raters work with the scales and how they use the scales and the level of subjectivity that is attached to using a scale like this with descriptors like we've just seen. We make the assumption that these human specialists will make the right judgments, but we look at the numbers and we are not quite sure that they really are making all the best judgments. So we looked at some research and we found some very recent research into this. The 2 papers that I wanted to mention is one by Kim, 2011, where he was diagnosing English for academic purposes, writing products, and he came up with a list of 35 statements on the basis of which first-year university students' writing ability could be measured. Another one was for children's writing, assessing children's writing, and the cohesive, the cohesion and use of cohesive devices, etc., in their writing was looked at. Just to give you an idea of what this is, this checklist comes from the second paper, the one about cohesion. So these are the sorts of statements that are supposed to help rate the test takers' abilities in that particular aspect. So this is what we read, this is what we experienced, and then this is what we read when we read up and we were preparing our research. And then we followed the 6 following steps. First, we went back to the CFR basically, and we selected 21 operational scales that we thought were relevant to our writing tasks and the products that our candidates are producing. With the help of those scales, then we selected a small group, just 3 of our own internal testing experts, and they produced, they looked at a specific Euroexam writing task, and they produced their own model answer, what they thought was a very good answer for that task. And using immediate recall technique, they also thought about what actually made their model answer a good answer and what aspects of that piece of writing made it a good quality piece of writing. As a next step, we looked at a limited number of papers, the same 3 experts, limited number of papers, and used the think aloud method for assessing the paper. So as they were going through the paper and using the operational scales to assess them, they were at the same time recording themselves, thinking about how you judge the paper, how you're using the scales. So it's basically a recording of how they were using the current scales. From this information and from what we had from the CFR scales, we collected a list of salient features that we thought were important in judging the quality of a piece of writing, and we formulated a list of questions on the basis of this. A list of yes or no questions for each of those features. When we had the questions, next step, we decided to turn those questions into a list of statements. So again, this is going to be a list of statements where the rater can make a binary choice, a binary decision. We also felt when we had those statements, we had, if you remember, 35 statements in the original research. We came up with a list of 36 statements. We still felt that some of the statements might still not be quite clear enough to raters, so we also added some further sort of comprehension questions that further specified what we were looking for in that particular statement. We did a pilot with a limited number of candidates, and then we had further field tests with first 30 and then looking at 75 candidate papers judged using the list, and then statistical analysis of the results. But maybe it would be best to show you how this all developed, how one particular statement on the checklist developed. So in the first step, as you remember, the expert was creating their own model answer to the question, and when we were creating that model answer, we were thinking about, so what makes my answer so good? One thing is clear organization. Ideas are organized into paragraphs. In the next step, when we were looking at candidate answers and we were doing the think aloud process, we said about the same thing, that at this point the candidate should start a new paragraph, which doesn't happen. So that seems to be important, the paragraphs. Then we came up with the concept question, are the ideas organized into paragraphs, where one paragraph stands for one idea. And from this, we came up with the actual statement. This became one of the statements on our list of 36. Each paragraph presents one distinct and unified idea. So this is, let me stop here for a moment. So this is why we felt, this is one of the 36, that when the rater looks at the statement and looks at the product, we felt that they have so much less stress, and it's such, so much easier to make that decision, because it's broken down into a very specific question, and all you have to do is make a yes or no decision. Is this true? You score 1. Is this not true? 0. That's that. But in the case of this particular statement as well, we thought of some helping further concept questions that the rater can use. Does the script follow standard paragraphing conventions? Does each paragraph focus on one idea, etc.? So that's the development of one particular question, and this is just a sneak peek at some of the statements that we now have on our list. So, things like this text is the required length as the defined task. That's what I will mention in a moment. Some lexical items beyond the target level are used appropriately, etc. So this list of statements, with the added value of those clarifying concept questions, we found that helped the raters immensely. So first, very clear advantage of the checklist versus the rating scale was for the raters themselves. The raters felt more secure in what they were doing. They thought that they were making decisions that they really could make in opposition to using the rating scales where they felt, okay, so is this 3 points based on those descriptors or 4? Right, okay, I'll make my decision, but I might not sleep very well tonight. But people, after using these, seem to be sleeping a lot better. Right, so I don't want to go very deep into the statistics, but just a few important points. Eventually, we decided to exclude statement number 3. This text is a required length as defined by the task, because when we tried it several times with more and more raters, it seemed that, and this probably also came from the nature of the task, that we didn't seem to really want the product to be a given length and nothing else but the given length. So we thought, okay, we're not going to use that particular statement. All the others were the right fit, and if you compare this with what we looked at a few slides before, and you look at the distribution of the marks. Remember, first everything was here in the middle, and now we have a much better spread with this checklist method. That clearly shows to us that rating in this way will be able to differentiate between levels of achievement much better than using the current rating scales. And also, very importantly, we have exact agreement between results using the rating scale or using the checklist in 89.74% of the cases. So it seems that we are actually measuring the same thing, whether the rating scale or the checklist, with a much better range, much better score range. So, important advances, broader score range, especially at the tails, high end, the low end, increased transparency. When a candidate comes back to us, any stakeholder comes back to us and says, okay, so why is this paper, why was it awarded this score? Using the list, it's much clearer and much easier to show that this is how we arrived at this result. And this is where your strengths are, this is where your opportunities to develop are. Okay. Which also, by doing this, we also achieve increased accountability. And finally, going back to the CFR, rating a checklist is not, of course, we didn't quite invent rating on a checklist. The CFR says that judging a person in relation to a list of points deemed to be relevant to a particular level, this method returns more transparent and more valid results, and also fits our method of testing. The level test that we use, this method is much better suited to those. Okay, I'm going to round up. We're going to do some further trials to make sure that these checklists actually work, and we would like to do a similar project with speaking to improve rating there as well. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. And now it's time for questions.
Just a quick one.
Yes, just a few.
I wonder about the practicality of this solution, because in terms of validity, reliability, I'm really convinced it's a much better approach. How do we translate into practicality? How much longer does it take? Do the testers complain that, the raters, that now it takes longer? They sleep better, but it takes longer to rate tests.
That's a very good question, and this is what exactly they do or they did. On the one hand, they were very, very grateful. On the other hand, they were complaining that, oh my goodness, this is going to take so much longer. So what we are actually now trialing, and we are planning to do, is to cut the list into two. So some raters will be using the top end of the list, others raters will be using the bottom end of the list. And so one rater will not actually have to spend double the time on a particular paper.
But that means twice as many raters, right?
It does. Which we find, okay, maybe not very hard to find those raters, but although that doesn't seem to be a problem, and the more raters we have, I think, the better if we are, actually. Yes, it does mean more raters, absolutely.
Thank you. Any more questions? One more question.
Is the computer-based test self-adaptable to the level of the student, or isn't it? Because in bullets Cambridge it is.
Our computer-based test, which is actually in the final phase of development,